Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Shadows Podcast. I'm your host, Trip Bodenheimer. And today I've got a very special guest. He is the host of the Drive On Podcast. He is also an author of a book, Surviving Son, which we'll get to momentarily. Scott DeLuzio, welcome to the Shadows Podcast, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be doing a little trade-off. So you're going to have to listen to his, hear my episode as well. So first thing before we get started, for our listeners out there, you have that 90-second elevator ride to, describe yourself. Who is Scott DeLuzio?
Yeah, so I joined the Army in 2005, originally from Connecticut. I live in Arizona now, but joined the Army in 2005 after 9/11 and realizing that the Army was struggling to meet their recruiting numbers. So it got me a little ticked off that where were all these people who were ready to move mountains after 9/11? And then I realized that I was one of those people and I still hadn't done anything. So I said, you know what, but I have no reason not to. I have nothing but excuses, and excuses are terrible. So I said, you know what, I'll join the Army and serve my country. And since getting back from out of the Army, getting back from Afghanistan, where I served in 2010, I started the podcast, the Drive On podcast, and wrote the book Surviving Son that you mentioned earlier. And really, I just have a real deep passion for giving back to the veteran and military community.
Yeah, it's awesome what you're doing, and your website's very well put together too, and you have veteran resources. Some phenomenal stuff out there. So definitely want people to go check it out. We'll talk about that momentarily as well. But the first thing I want to do is I want to jump into 5 rounds brought to you by our sponsor, Giant Worldwide. Definitely head over to giant.tv/shadows. Check out their leadership seminar they offer, certification program as well. Got some really good stuff over there for you. But the first question I want to ask you, what is a fear that you have?
So the biggest fear that I have, and this definitely got exposed through my military service, is a fear of heights. That is the biggest thing for me. Our family went on a trip. We live out in Arizona now. We went on a road trip up to the Grand Canyon, and
that'll do it.
Just standing at the edge, looking down, I was just paralyzed with fear. In basic training, we had to do the rappel tower, where we had to rappel off of this 3-story tower and go down, and rappel off of it. And I was so nervous at the top of this tower that it was clearly obvious that I was nervous. I was shaking. I was not in my normal self. And so as I'm stepping over the wall, the drill sergeant yells at me and says, "Holy crap, give me your hand. You're not hooked in right." And I think I just about achieved flight that day, getting back over that wall, because I was just so scared of it. And then to make matters worse, he was just screwing with me. I was clipped in just fine. But he's cracking up at me. He's getting a good laugh at my expense. To make matters worse, I had to go back over and actually go down the wall, and I'm just such a mess at that point. But yeah, biggest fear for me is heights.
Wow. The Grand Canyon, it's funny you say it, because we were stationed at Davis-Monthan in Tucson.
Okay.
And we went to the Grand Canyon, and I had my daughter, she was young at the time, I had her on my shoulders. And I remember walking, and I looked over the edge. This is horrible parenting, I know, but I looked over the edge. And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." And she was like, "Yay," like loving it. My wife, my other daughter, would not get within 10 feet of the edge. But
right.
Yeah. Okay. So fear of heights. What book recommendation would you have for a listener out there?
There's a lot of good ones. One I just got done reading, and I'm about to have this woman on my podcast as well. It's a book called Sacrifice by a woman named Michelle Black, and it's about her husband. She's a Gold Star widow. Her husband was killed in Africa a few years ago, and it's a story of the sacrifice that the military families make, and what really goes on with the military families when they're coping with the loss and things like that, and not even just a loss, but the deployments and the you know the time away, the training, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot that goes into it that I think the general American public just doesn't understand, and I think the book does a really good job really explaining what the sacrifice is, both on the normal, the training and deployment side, but also where after a loss of a loved one due to the military service. So I think it's a really great book. It's fresh in my mind because I just got done reading it, but it really is a good book, and I think people should definitely check that one out.
Okay, and we'll have that listed under the book recommendations on our
Excellent.
website. Go-to superhero for you?
Superhero, huh? That's a good one. I like, this is probably very counterintuitive based on what I just said about heights, but I like Superman. The way he just can do just about anything, it seems like, outside of the whole kryptonite thing, but he's here on it.
70s Superman or like more modern Superman?
I don't know. Yeah, probably.
Christopher Reeves.
Yeah, maybe around that time. I think that's probably a good one. Yeah.
Okay. I actually went to we were at Planet Hollywood this past week and actually had his outfit from the original Superman.
Oh, really?
Pretty cool to see. Yeah.
That's cool.
I had one of the villains on here, the Kryptonian villains.
Okay.
Was that Jack O'Halloran was actually one of the guests on the podcast.
Oh, cool.
Okay. You could try one job for a day just to see what it's like. What would that job be?
One job for a day. Let's see. I think something that I've always wanted to do, never did it. And this goes back to my upbringing. We had a very patriotic upbringing, looking up to the military and first responders and all that kind of stuff. I think a job as a first responder and maybe police or fire or EMS. I don't know which one that would be for me, but maybe I can expand on this and take 3 days and try all three of those. but I just think that there's something deeply meaningful in giving back to the community that you work in and that you serve and everything, and I think any one of those would be an outstanding job to try.
Yeah. All right. And last question for you. You could have dinner with 3 people who are no longer with us and they cannot be family members.
Okay.
Who would you pick and why?
I think George Washington would be one of them. I think obvious reasons, just, kind of learning about the formation of our country and, being the first president, that's got to have a lot of interesting stories going on there, with him. So I think that would be, a great one to talk to. Let's see who else. Let's see. Probably. I'm probably going to be sticking with a lot of the founding fathers. I think just, like Thomas Jefferson, learning about, his life and, talking to him, wrote the Declaration of Independence and everything. I think that's pretty, interesting as well. And let's see, I'll pick someone outside of that category. I would probably go with, gosh, I don't know. Let's go with Martin Luther King as well. Talk to him to see,
Got a good little like area covered there.
I think so. Yeah. What it was like back in that era. I didn't grow up during that time period. But to find out what he was going through, and our country continues to have struggles with various things, and it'd be nice to kind of hear his thoughts on things going on today.
That'd be 3 really good podcast guests too.
Yeah, it would be
Good conversation with those 3. Yeah, no, that's good. 3 good answers there. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you survived our 5 rounds. Now, next thing I want to come to is your story, as my dogs start barking here. Tell us about your upbringing growing up.
Yeah. So like I said, we had a very patriotic family growing up. There's videos of my brother and I standing out in the front yard. I'm holding an American flag and he's singing the national anthem, and he's young, like before he could even really get all the words out, from the song and everything. And
How much younger is he than you?
He was 3 years younger than I was. So, it was just one of those things where we grew up, my parents, they lived through the Vietnam era. They saw some of their classmates. Neither one of them served, but some of their classmates and their neighbors and relatives and stuff had gone to Vietnam, and they saw, what took place over there on the nightly news, and they saw the body counts, and they had friends who didn't make it back and things like that. And so they respected, the people who went over there and fought for us and fought, for their country, whether they wanted to be there or not. There was a draft at that time, but they still did what their country asked of them, whether they volunteered or they got drafted. And so they instilled that in us growing up. And when Desert Storm was happening in the early 90s, I remember going to Westover Air Reserve Base up in Massachusetts, just a little ways away from where we lived. And we were greeting the troops as they came back home, and they said, these are the people who are out there fighting for us and sacrificing for us, and really, out there trying to make a difference for us. And so that kind of spirit and that sense of pride in your country and the people who serve our country just got instilled in us at a very early age. So, that was a big part of why my brother and I ended up joining the military. I talked a little bit about, why I joined the military. My younger brother, Stephen, he actually joined the military before I did. So when 9/11 happened, he was still in high school, but I was in college. And I actually, at that point, I considered just dropping out of college and joining the military, because I knew there was going to be some sort of military response, and I wanted to be a part of that. But I also knew that if I dropped out, that I probably wasn't going to finish what I started with my college education. So, right. I said, I was going to college in Rhode Island at it's a college called Bryant College, which is now Bryant University. We're actually the last graduating class of Bryant College before it switched over to university. So, so that's where I was for 4 years in the early 90s, early 2000s. Graduated in 2000, early 2000s. I went to college, and I decided, I'm just going to stick it out when I'm going there, and I'll be a part of whatever is going on after I get out of college. My brother in 2004 joined the Vermont Army National Guard, so he was going up to school in Vermont, and he joined because he met a guy who was in the National Guard, talked about it with him, and learned a little bit more about it, and he was really into it, and so he decided he wanted to join. And so overnight, my brother went from this little guy who all our lives he was looking up to me, being the bigger brother, and all of a sudden he became the guy who I was looking up to, because that's just how we were raised, to look up to the military and the first responders and things like that. So I just all of a sudden had this newfound respect for him. Not that I didn't respect him before, but it was just a new level that I had there. And then, like I said, come in 2005, I started hearing these reports that the military wasn't meeting their recruiting numbers, and I was just like, what's going on? Where are all these people? And then I realized that was me. So yeah, that was kind of us in a nutshell. My brother and I, as we got older, we would go up to Boston to see hockey games. We were big Boston Bruins fans back then, and we would just raise hell up there and have a good time. So
What, to kind of backtrack a little bit, 9/11, where were you? Yeah, I always like to ask this question. It's kind of like for our era, it's kind of like the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
Where were you at when 9/11 happened?
I was in college. So I woke up that morning for a psychology class, and I was walking into school from the dorms, and I heard people in the hallways talking about a plane crash in New York. And I think, like a lot of people, before we started seeing the news footage, we were just thinking like a small, like a Cessna or something. Maybe it was a cloudy day or whatever. And that's just what I assumed it was. It was just something like that. It's like, oh, well, that's unfortunate. That sucks. Sad for the people there, but what am I going to do about it? It's, it is what it is. And then when I got to the class, the teacher came in and told us about both planes that had crashed into the World Trade Center. And I was like, whoa, hold up. There's two of them now. Like, that's two, like, one is an accident. Two, that's more than just a coincidence. Like that doesn't just happen. Like that had to be somewhat deliberate, or really, really bad weather conditions or something. I didn't know. And come to find out, it was perfectly clear skies, and that there was no weather issues there. And so my father at the time, he was actually on a business trip in Pennsylvania, and he was close enough to the plane that went down in Pennsylvania that he was able to see the smoke in the sky from the field that it was coming from.
Wow.
And the company that he was visiting, that he was working with, they basically just shut down for the day. Everyone went home, because the initial reports that were coming in on the radio that the people in the office were listening to said that a plane had crashed into a school, like an elementary school nearby. And so everyone left to go get their kids out of school in case, more planes were going to fall into their kids' school, and they didn't want to take any chances. So my dad was just sitting there like, okay, well, I guess I have nothing left to do here. So he went back to the hotel trying to figure out how he was going to get back home, because at that point, all the planes were grounded. But the next morning, he said the restaurant area of the hotel was turned into an FBI command center. Like they had all their briefings and everything in his hotel, and he was sitting there eating his breakfast, just basically listening to history unfold in the hotel. Listening to all the briefings and everything. They didn't ask him to leave or anything. They were just going through whatever they were going to do for that day, and where they're going to do their investigations and everything. And he was just sitting there eating a Danish, listening to the whole conversation, which is incredible. But the reason why I said that was because, the cell phone networks had gotten flooded with people calling after all these attacks. And I couldn't reach my dad for the longest time. And I knew he was in Pennsylvania. I didn't know his travel schedule. I didn't know when he was leaving Pennsylvania. I didn't know when he was coming back home or anything. So for all I knew, he was on the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. I didn't have any clue. So, for a while there, I was pretty unnerved, trying to figure out like what had happened to him. So, fortunately, he was safe. He was on the ground. Nothing happened to him, and he ended up driving back home, which fortunately from Connecticut to Pennsylvania isn't too far. It's not like a several day trip. He was able to get back home the next day. So.
Yeah, I was actually in college too. I was walking through the little mezzanine area, and I remember seeing something about a plane crash on the television, but I didn't really watch it. I kept walking through, and I got to my professor's office to ask him something, and he was crying, and he was telling me, he's like, class is going to be canceled today. I don't think everybody understands the significance of this event. This is probably one of the biggest events we're ever going to witness in our life. And I was like,
yeah,
a plane crash? I was kind of like you. I was like, a plane crash somewhere? And then he started explaining it to me. He turned his television on, and we started watching it. But no, I like to ask that question. It's funny because the classes that I would teach at Airman Leadership School in Germany, I would ask them, like, where were we all at during 9/11? And they were 2 and 3 years old, which made me feel really old. They were like daycare.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned you and your brother Steven joined. Um, Now, this is a big part of your journey. And this is something, here at the Shadows, we talk about, that shadow that we have, some of the dark moments in our lives, but they become part of our journey and part of who we are. If you don't mind, take us back to, what happened in Afghanistan and the events that transpired, where, unfortunately, and my condolences to you too, from your brother, Stephen.
Yeah. So he and I were both in the National Guard. He was in the Vermont and I was in the Connecticut National Guard, and so both of our units fell under the same brigade, and that whole brigade was deployed in 2010. So we both were in Afghanistan at the same time, which is one of those things that a lot of people, when they hear that, they're like, I didn't think that they allowed that to happen, to have two siblings overseas at the same time. Especially after seeing things like Saving Private Ryan and stuff like that, they just don't expect that could happen. But especially with National Guard units, and first off, there's no like regulations that prevent that from happening, but especially National Guard units where you're dealing with the local community is usually where you're drawing the population of people. It's very common to have siblings in the same unit and potentially deployed to the same area. So we did have that, and our company had several sets of brothers, and I think my brothers did as well. And and then he and I were over there. When we were over there, we were stationed far enough apart that we never saw each other while we were there. But we were both in the eastern part of Afghanistan. I was right along the Pakistan border, and our part of our mission was to secure the border area for the NATO supplies that were coming through from Pakistan, because Afghanistan being a landlocked country, whenever we ship over supplies on cargo ships, it has to come through the nearest port, which happens to be in Pakistan, and then they get on a truck and drive through. So we had to secure that area, allow the supplies having safe passage into the country, and then that was our primary mission while we were over there. We also went on several missions throughout the country where we would, through the eastern part of the country, we didn't veer too far out of there, but we would fly out to remote villages and conduct operations with the Afghan army. We had probably 3 or 4 weeks where we were training with the Afghan army. Unfortunately, this fell largely during the Ramadan period. And so in the summers in Afghanistan, where it gets incredibly hot, and the people who we're training with can't eat or drink anything during the day, made it very difficult for us to train them on anything. They just wanted to find a cool place in the shade to go hang out and not be running around in the sun like we were trying to have them do. Which I completely understand, but from what I understand, it wasn't much better any other time of the year to train with them as well. So so we had that going for us, going against us, I should say. But we would also work on joint operations with them, where they would go and kind of take the lead, going through these villages and searching for Taliban activity, weapons, and things along those lines. And we kind of just had to follow along. And I like to equate it to being the driver's ed instructor. While they were the student, we were the instructor. We had the pedal on our side to pump the brakes if we needed to, but they were ultimately behind the wheel. And so that's kind of like what we were doing over there, is just kind of assisting them and guiding them and training them as best as we could. My brother, his unit was doing a lot of the same kind of missions, where they were going into villages, looking for Taliban activity and things along those lines. The day my brother was killed, he and his unit were going through a village that they've had been to before. They were familiar with the layout of the village and the capabilities of the enemy who were there, but they walked into an ambush, and they started taking fire from the village and the surrounding areas. And so like any good infantry soldiers would do, they found cover, they returned fire, and were given the fight back. My brother, in that firefight, he went to go turn around and yell something back to some of the guys who were kind of off to the side behind him a little ways. And as he was about to say something, his head kind of jerked back, and he slumped backwards on his assault pack, and was killed pretty much instantly from that that shot that had hit him. And naturally, the guys rushed to him. They tried to, give him aid, and they called the medic over and everything. But there was nothing that they could do. He was already pretty much gone at that point. And so that mission went from a, go search for the Taliban and things like that, to now a recovery mission. They, like any military will tell you, you never leave a fallen soldier or sailor, Marine, and anything like that. You never leave anyone behind. And so that's what they did. They went to go recover him and bring him out of there. And it was that much more difficult for them, because not only was my brother no longer able to shoot back, but the 4 people who were carrying him out were no longer able to shoot back as well. And so that platoon size element that was out there of, I would say maybe about 40 people, now they were down 5 people. And so that's a significant reduction in their firepower. Unfortunately, in that recovery effort, another one of their soldiers was killed as well. And so that reduced their firepower even more, because not only were there 2 KIAs, but now you had 8 people, 10 total, who were no longer being able to shoot back out of a 40-person unit, and so that really significantly decreased their firepower, and it made it much more difficult. Not to mention the terrain that they had to walk on over there in Afghanistan it's very loose rock, very, very slippery, very jagged rocks. And so they were slipping and sliding, and ultimately they ended up having to slide down the hill that they were on. At the base of this hill or mountain side that they were on was a house that was built into the mountain, and they slid down the mountain all the way down to the roof of this house, and they cleared the house and used that as kind of their casualty collection point, and where they would kind of regroup and kind of figure out what they were going to do from there. So that day probably went on for years for them. It was just one of those things that anyone who's ever been in a firefight can tell you that 5 seconds can feel like an eternity. And this was something that went on for hours for them. And not only were they being shot at, but they also lost two of their close friends. And that's, that just is a terrible experience to have to go through. And then on my side, that day, I was out in one of these remote villages, like I was talking about, with the Afghan army conducting our operations. And I had cleared through the village, and we got a call on the radio saying that there was a helicopter that was coming in with some VIPs. We didn't know who these people were, but they were coming in to land in this village, and they wanted to check out what was going on. So my squad had to go and clear an area for them to land and secure it. And when it landed, an American general and a couple of French soldiers stepped off the helicopter. And this area that we were in was like a French occupied territory. So I think they're just there to kind of check on what we were doing and our progress through the village, any intelligence that we gathered, things like that. And at the time, I was the highest ranking guy and I was only a E5 sergeant, so I was not that high ranking at the time, but I was the highest ranking guy where the helicopter landed next to the general. And so I went to go greet the general and talk to him and figure out what he needed from us and everything. And so that was a little unnerving for an E5 to be chatting with the general like that. So as I was talking to him, he gets a call on his radio telling him that there were 2 American KIA in a different part of the country, and they didn't say any names over the radio or anything like that. But come to find out, the 2 American KIA, one of them was my brother. And so it's just the reason why I mentioned it, it's just such a bizarre coincidence to me that would have happened while I was standing there and hearing that. And it didn't really soften the blow for me at all, when I eventually found out, but it was definitely a unique, bizarre experience.
When did you officially find out that was your brother?
Yeah. So a little while after that happened, I got a call on the radio from my commanding officer looking specifically for me.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know anything about the chain of command, the commanding officer usually works its way through the chain of command to get to you, as opposed to just going straight to a sergeant, enlisted guy like that. And so I was like, okay, what did I screw up? I didn't do anything particularly great that day. I did my job, which was good, but I didn't do anything like extraordinary. So I was like, okay, what did I screw up? And I'm running through everything in my head that I did that day. I was like, I can't think of anything. Like, I checked all my guys' equipment, make sure they didn't lose anything. I was just rattling my brain trying to figure out what went wrong.
Yeah.
And eventually I linked up with him, and he tells me, your brother's unit got ambushed, and that my brother had gotten hit. And so I jump into big brother mode, thinking, okay, what are the logistics here? How do I get to him? How do I go be with him, just to either comfort him, or if he needs, I don't know, blood or an organ or something, like, if I don't need it, he can have it, just take it from me, like, let me be there to help him however I can. But, at that point in the deployment, it had never crossed my mind that he wouldn't come home. It was always one of those things, like, he's gonna come home, he's gonna be fine. It wasn't even a thing that he could get injured by combat, and we were both infantry soldiers. Like, I should have known better than that, but I think I just lied to myself to tell myself that, no, like, this can't happen, and so that way I could focus on my job, right? This is just something that happens to other people. It doesn't happen to me, it doesn't happen to my family. So when my commanding officer told me that he had been hit, didn't even cross my mind that he could have been killed in that firefight. And then he told me that he was killed, and it was like complete shock and disbelief. I was like, that can't be. But it happened. And so I broke down. I was a complete mess. And just about 20 minutes after finding out about my brother's death, our own unit started taking fire from the village we just came out of. And so I had to put that grieving aside and jump back into army mode, if you will, and go and lead my soldiers, make sure that they were positioned where they needed to be, that they had the supplies that they needed, ammo and all that kind of stuff, to make sure that nothing happened to them. I would never want, because I wasn't there and I didn't have my head on straight, I would never want them to have a friendly fire incident where they were not, positioned correctly or anything like that. But that grief turned to anger real quick. And I just wanted to get revenge. And I wanted to I just had this hatred for the Afghan people in that moment. I was like, why can't you guys handle your own country? Why do good people like my brother have to come here and get killed? Like, why can't you guys be the ones who are getting killed? You guys are still here breathing, and my brother's not. It's like, it just angered me so much. And it was just not a good place to be mentally. But I resolved myself to say, okay, I have to keep my head straight throughout all of this. I cannot let anything happen to my guys. I don't know how I would be able to look their families in the eyes and say, your loved one's not here because I screwed up and I couldn't keep my head on straight. And I also didn't want my parents getting a second knock on the door that day saying, hey, you got another son who was killed. And, I didn't want my wife to become a widow, or my newborn son who was at home, to grow up without a father. So like, I wanted to stay in it for all of them, for my guys, for their families, for my family. I wanted to make sure that I kept my head on in the game. I said, there's going to be plenty of time to grieve. I'm going to have a whole lifetime to grieve, but I need to get through this first. And so, as hard as it was, that's what I did.
Well, first of all, thank you for opening up and sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And gosh, there's just so much to unpack from that. Going back to Stephen, outside of the uniform, and first of all, I have utmost respect for the Vermont National Guard. I actually have worked with the Vermont National Guard. We've been working with the Senegalese Air Force the past couple of years. So got kind of a soft spot for them. But let's talk about your brother, Stephen. Outside of uniform, What are some of the best memories you have with him? You talked about Bruins games, but what are some other things that come to mind that put a smile on your face thinking back to him?
There's one story that I actually tell in the book, Surviving Son, about him. And we went up to Boston. We're already a little bit older. I think I had already graduated college, and we went up to Boston for a Bruins game, and it was against the Montreal Canadiens. And so the Bruins won that game, and we had been drinking the whole night, while we were at the game and everything. And so there's this whole, USA vibe and everything like that in the arena, like, Canada sucks or whatever. It was all, in good fun and everything. It's not like anyone really had any ill will towards Canada, but it was just kind of like rubbing it in their face or whatever. And so, if you've ever left a professional sports event or even a college sports event, the sea of people leaving. It's just like elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, whatever, waddling like penguins out of the arena. And so we're on our way out, and my brother starts this USA chant, and he's just starts screaming it. And it's out of nowhere. It's not like he's like, hey, check this out or whatever. He just starts screaming it. And he gets the entire place to start screaming, USA, USA. And it was so loud and deafening, this roar of USA. And it was so funny. We were cracking up about it. And, we had put nothing in our mouths but beer up until that point in the night. So we were pretty hungry. And so we found a burger place kind of nearby, and we went in and we sat down, put our order in, and the burger that my brother ordered, the waiter goes, would it be okay, is this okay with Canadian bacon? And my brother looks at him like he was the most awful person in the world, and he goes, hell no, I want American bacon on that, going off that whole USA vibe and everything that we're just going from. And he goes, okay, well, would French fries be okay with that? He goes, hell no, I want American fries.
French Canadian. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So he was just that kind of person. He would come up with these random things, these funny things that he would say, and they just stick with you. These memories of how funny he was, and if you were talking about something that bored him, even in the slightest way, he would just drop to the floor and pretend like he was sleeping. And he was just that kind of person. He would just he did it because it was like, all right, we know this is kind of boring for you, but he would just drop down and pretend like he's sleeping. It was so funny to see him do that. And he was just one of those kind of people who, I know a lot of people say this about people, but when he would walk in a room, the room just got lighter. Everyone was happier, having him around, and he was just that kind of person.
I've asked myself this about my sister, because I lost my sister when she was 14 years old, and I see a lot of her in my daughter, and my daughter and I, we are just, chemistry between us is just incredible, like with wits and everything when we're out and about. But I always think about what it'd be like to do like podcasting or something with her. How do you think that'd be to actually like podcast with Stephen?
I think it would be funny. I think the podcast that I have now, there's some funny episodes in there, but a lot of it tends to be a little more serious. I don't think I could do the podcast that I'm doing now with him,
because you have that humor in there.
It would be way too humorous. Not to say that I couldn't do a podcast with him. Yeah. It would probably be totally a different take. Yeah, it would be. And maybe it could even be the same direction where we're talking about serious issues, but we kind of joke around about it, and
you can liven it up.
Liven it up. The way we would talk about things, kind of that dark humor, when you're deployed overseas, you kind of talk about things a little bit differently. Civilians, if they hear the way we talked, they would think we're nuts, but it's a way of kind of coping with things. And I think we could probably get away with doing something like that. I think we could have some fun with that. Okay.
Well, speaking of coping with things, I want to talk about some, various coping mechanisms and stuff. You're pretty open about PTSD. Talk to us about kind of the aftermath, kind of leading up to, writing your book and the podcast you're doing, but talk about some of the struggles that you had with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah. So when I first came home, I was not in a good place mentally. I, I had a very short fuse. I carried that anger that I was talking about. I was angry not only at the Afghan people, but I was angry at everything. And I would get set off by the smallest of things, the such little insignificant things that would happen. I said I had a newborn son. He was born just shortly before I deployed to Afghanistan, and so he was about 9 months or so old when I got back. Um, and he would do things that normal kids do. He would cry about something, or he would make a mess, and I would just get completely angry, and it was like, that's not fair to him. Like, he's a kid. This is what kids do. And it was one of those things where I thought that I could just deal with this on my own. It was, I think, the whole, just be a man, suck it up, deal with it kind of thing. It was that kind of attitude that I had. And I didn't realize just how bad I was, and the way I was coping with things were completely unhealthy, and it was self-destructive, but it was also destructive to the relationships around me. I I would have trouble sleeping at night, and so I would drink myself to sleep. I figured, if I drink enough, eventually I'll pass out, and then I'll have to sleep. Because I'm just going to be knocked out. But then the next morning I wake up and I'm a mess because I'm hungover and I'm groggy and everything like that. So I jack up the caffeine intake, and at first that was fine. I was able to get through the day for a couple weeks, but then I started drinking caffeine later and later in the day, and that ultimately started affecting my sleep even more, because when you're having a cup of coffee at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, that's not exactly going to do very good for you to go to bed and get any kind of sleep. So then I would drink more, and then I would drink more coffee and more alcohol, and it was just this vicious cycle that I was in. It was very self-destructive. But I was also just a pain in the ass for like all the people around me. I wasn't a good employee. The job that I had when I first came back. So for people who aren't familiar with the National Guard, we also have civilian jobs as well, because we train 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. And the job that I had when I came back from Afghanistan, I just had a really hard time going to that job. I found no sense of purpose or meaning in the job. That I had trouble connecting with my coworkers and people that I used to enjoy hanging out with, talking to, working with, all that kind of stuff. Even going out for a happy hour or lunch or something like that. I used to enjoy that. It just, I couldn't find myself being able to relate to them anymore, and it was just really difficult for me. So I ended up leaving that job shortly after coming back, because it was just a struggle for me to even get out of bed and find any purpose in what I was doing. Um, and I noticed too in my son, I would do this thing where whenever I was frustrated or angry or upset, I would just grit my teeth. And it got to the point where it was actually starting to hurt my own teeth. Like, I was doing it so much and so intensely that it was hurting myself. But I would also notice that my son would do it anytime time he was frustrated with something, or upset or whatever. Like, if he was upset, he would be gritting his teeth too. And I was like, that is a real ugly look in the mirror, looking at myself in this little kid who's not even 2 years old, and he's mimicking what I'm doing. And I said, okay, that's not what I want for him. I want him to have a happy life, not this ball of stress and anxiety and worry and everything else, is frustration that I'm carrying around. He doesn't need to carry that crap around. I said, so something needs to change. And when I finally realized that something really did need to change, it was our dog was in our bedroom, and we had these nice brand new white carpets in our bedroom, and she had gotten sick, and she threw up on this white carpet. but she was just inches away from the tiled bathroom floor, where if she threw up in there, it would have been so much easier to clean
Always
up,
how they
right?
do it, though. Mine do it the
It's
same way.
always how they do it. And so I just start flipping out, and I'm screaming and I'm yelling and I'm just making a complete fool of myself.
Yep.
And it's like, first off, the dog is sick. Me yelling at the dog isn't going to make the dog feel any better. Second off, she's not going to understand what I'm saying anyway. So what am I even doing? I'm flipping my lid over something that I can easily take care of. I just got to go rent a steam cleaner and, clean the thing up, and it's going to be fine. It's not the end of the world. And I realized, like, I completely lost control, and I was starting to realize more and more how much I was losing control. Not only was I losing control with things like losing my temper, but my drinking was out of control, and I had zero sleep patterns. It was so hard for me to get to sleep and stay asleep that it was just, everything was so out of control in my life. And so, so I decided, I need to go and get some help. And so I called the vet center, and they're affiliated through the VA somehow. But they provide counseling services to people who deployed, and the families of the fallen. So needless to say, I checked a couple boxes for being able to use their services. But I went to the counseling sessions on a regular basis for almost 2 years, maybe 2.5 years or so, or 1.5 years, I should say. And it really started to help. I found myself not getting so angry at the little things anymore. I found myself not drinking quite as much, and getting better sleep, and really just turning the corner. And so right around the time that I moved from Connecticut to Arizona, where I am now, the counselor that I had at the vet center, he was moving to another position, and I said, you know what, this feels like a good clean break. I'm about to move. He's about to move, and so let's just kind of end this here. And I think I'm okay now. And maybe I'm not 100% where I used to be, but I think I can take it from
You're in a
here.
good
And
spot.
I think I can handle it. Yeah. So I did. We moved out here, and things were okay for a little while, and I was kind of making a little progress. But then I noticed I started backtracking, and I started falling into some of those old habits, drinking and getting angry at the little things, and yelling, and I was just being a jerk, and it was not who I was before. And I keep saying this to people too, whenever I talk about this. I was a completely different person before I went to Afghanistan than I was afterwards. And I didn't like that person who I became. I didn't like the angry, the frustration, the out of, just completely out of control type of person that I became. So a couple of years ago, I decided I needed to go back and talk to somebody. I needed to get more help. And so I've been, going in and out of, counseling for a couple of years now. And, it helps, but it's something that I realized is that mental health is a lot like your physical health, where you go in for checkups every once in a while for your physical health. Guys, you get a colonoscopy or mammograms, or, just an annual checkup or whatever that you might go to, and that's just normal. Like, you're supposed to do that just to make sure everything's kind of working right. And your mental health is similar, because you might think things are okay, but you might be slipping a little bit, and you might need to go and just talk to someone and get that, just call it a tune-up, if you will, and get back on track. And so that's something that I've realized over the last few years, is that, it's not like a broken arm where you go to the doctor, you get it healed, and you take the cast off, and boom, you're good. And you don't need to keep going to the doctor for that afterwards. Like, it's generally going to heal itself, and you're going to be fine after that. It's something where you kind of have to keep up on it, and you need to, just make sure that you're not falling back like I was doing.
I like what you said there too about, taking in for the tune-up, because it's, I heard a while back, we know stuff's wrong with our vehicle, but we're afraid to look under the hood.
Yeah.
to see what it is. And you definitely need to take it in for those tune-ups. I'm a big advocate for mental health. I go to mental health. I've been very open about it on the show. I think that, the whole stigma behind it, it's crazy when you think about it. Physical fitness, you promote it on Instagram and do all this, and you get tons of followers, and people, just think you're phenomenal for having a nice body. But when you tell people you go to mental health and you're working on your mind, which is, one of your big pillars, people look at you like, oh, what a weakness you have.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to see that now it's starting to come into the forefront of, kudos for getting help, and kudos for going and seeing somebody and for talking to someone, because everybody needs it to an extent. And, and again, thank you for opening up about that. And what kudos to your wife for dealing with all that. I think a lot of times that goes unnoticed, is, the people who are on the receiving end, like you said, you were tough to be around. And what would you say about the resiliency and the strength of your wife for putting up with that version of you?
First off, she's a saint for putting up with that. I mean, I was, like I said, I was a jerk. I was, I never was like physically or verbally, abusive towards her. For some reason, she
had to take a toll.
But she escaped the direct wrath of that. But seeing me just unravel like I did, and she knew me obviously before I was like this, so she knew the potential that I had in there, and then seeing what I was, and it, that had to have taken a toll on her as well. But she was strong. She's always been strong. She's had some health issues of her own, and she's been resilient through all of that. And I am just so grateful that I found someone who believed in me enough that she was willing to stick with me through all of this, and not just hang up the hat and call it quits because I was too much to deal with, or anything, and she's the type of person where she calls it like she sees it. And if she sees something that's screwed up, she's going to tell you it's screwed up, and she's going to say, hey, fix this. Don't just sit around here feeling sorry for yourself, or feeling angry at the world or whatever. Go do something about it and go fix this. And that was a kick in the pants I needed to get back on track, and so I think, without her, I don't know where I would be. I don't know if I would have continued spiraling out of control and just going down that dark place.
Kudos to her. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Kudos to her. And next thing I want to talk about, you've done some phenomenal things as of late. One of which is, I think we'll go podcast first. We'll go podcast, then book. So we'll talk about your podcast, Drive On Podcast. Folks, go check it out. Website is phenomenal, very well put together. He's got veteran resources, which I'm not gonna lie, I saw that and I was like, oh, that's awesome to have that on your, genius. We all have, base agency list and stuff at our desk. I'm like, this is a really good tool to have on your website. So tell us about the Drive On Podcast, kind of the genesis. How did it get started? What is your overall mission, and where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So first off, you can find the Drive On Podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You should be able to find it there, or go to driveonpodcast.com, and you can find all the subscribe links there, or just listen to it straight on the website. So that's where you can find it. But the reason why I started the podcast was because since coming back from Afghanistan, I knew several veterans who took their own lives due to PTSD or the whatever stresses that they were going through in their lives. And one is too many, but it just got to be too much when you get these phone calls or these text messages or whatever kind of messages saying that so and so took their life. And I couldn't sit there doing nothing about it, and just waiting for the next phone call to come through and say, oh, this other person who was a good friend passed away because of whatever they were going through. And so I started the Drive On Podcast because I knew of these people, and I wanted to do something to help. And so I started doing some research and figuring out what some of the issues were that people were going through. And like PTSD is huge. A lot of returning combat soldiers are dealing with that. Marital issues, substance abuse, uh, all sorts of relationship, job related issues. We talk about all sorts of things like that because they're all those stresses that are somewhat unique to the military community and the veterans. uh, the divorce rate amongst veterans is so much higher than the civilian counterparts. You think about an 18-year-old kid who joins the military and does his 20 years and gets out and now has to figure out how to write a resume. He's never done that in his life, and so we talk about things like that and how to apply for a job and how to find how to network and find the jobs that are out there in the industries that you're looking for, and all sorts of things like that. We like, there's no topic that we're not going to cover. We're going to cover pretty much everything except for politics and anything that might be illegal. I don't want anyone going to jail because they listen to a podcast and heard some great idea that's going to put them behind bars or whatever.
Give them some street cred though when they're in there though. Why are you in here listening to something I picked up on a podcast?
It was a podcast, man. Yeah. It was I'm pretty hardcore. Yeah. But we also talked to other nonprofits and other organizations that are out there serving the veteran community. The spouses, the families, everyone involved in the military community has people out there who are rooting for them, and they're doing great work through maybe alternative forms of therapy, job placement services, other types of things that they're doing just to really help out that community. There's so many people out there really rooting for our community, the military and the veterans who are out there. It just makes sense to try to put that information out there, and ultimately the goal is to give hope for the people who might feel like that all hope is lost, that they're a lost cause, and that they have nothing worth living for, and that couldn't be further from the truth. You have a lot to offer. You may have screwed stuff up in your past, but it doesn't mean that you can't fix it and move forward. There's nothing beyond repair. And when you hear stories from other veterans who've struggled with something similar, it kind of gives you hope knowing that you're not alone, especially when you hear how they came through the other side and came out better off. And it didn't end them, and it made them a stronger, better person. And when you've gone to the VA and you've tried all the options that they have available for whatever it is that you're dealing with, and none of that seems to work, well, chances are there's some other organization out there that is doing something different, something that maybe the VA doesn't offer, doesn't cover, or whatever. There's people out there who want the veterans to succeed. They want their families to succeed, and they're doing all sorts of things. So if there's someone out there who's thinking that they're at the end of their rope and they've tried everything and that they are a lost cause, that I think that couldn't be further from the truth. There are so many people out there who really want you to succeed, and I think you just need to keep on trying. Try another day. Try keep looking forward to that next opportunity that could help push you forward.
One thing I want to ask you about your podcast too is, if looking at all the past episodes you had some great guests, some great topics, just as you mentioned, but someone heads over there, they're checking it out. I see they don't have to follow it like in chronological order or anything like that.
Right.
What's the one episode you would say, if you're checking out my podcast, this is the one to start with?
I had done an episode a few years ago, back like one of the first interviews that I did on the podcast. Mm-hmm. And it's with a guy named Wes Black, and I think it's probably episode 13 or 14, somewhere around there. It was actually a two-part episode, so it might actually be 13 and 14. But the first one out of that series was the one that I'm referring to, and he served with my brother. He was actually the first one to reach my brother after he was killed, and he was one of my brother's best friends. He was good friends. They served in Iraq together, served in Afghanistan together. They were really, really good buddies. And when he talked on the podcast. He talked about how he got diagnosed with terminal cancer from the exposure to the burn pits that they had over there in Iraq and Afghanistan. And his outlook on life was just incredible. And it actually made me feel like, what the heck is wrong with me? Like, this guy has a terminal diagnosis and I'm over here, and I've been getting angry at these little things. And he's talking about how doesn't matter how sick the chemo treatments make him. He's going out and playing with his son, and he's doing things with him, and he's making memories, and he's trying to do his best to be a good father and a good husband and a good, just an all around good person. And it just really opened up my eyes to say, you know what, that there's so much that could be going wrong, but unless I'm in his shoes, like, I have nothing to complain about. I don't have a terminal diagnosis. I know we all have an expiration date at some point, but he knows that he knew that at that point that his was coming closer than he originally thought. And unfortunately, just a couple of weeks ago, he had passed away. But listening to that episode just really put things into perspective for me. He just really was a great person, had a great attitude towards life. Even when he was going through his chemo treatments, he never missed any work. He would always go back into work, sick as a dog, but he still did it. And he did everything he could to make memories with his son. And I think that's just a really great, important lesson to take away.
Wow. Yeah, we'll put those 2 episodes in our description as well, link for everybody to check it out. So excuse me. So yeah, folks, go check out those 2 episodes as well. And like I said, awesome job with the podcast. I've listened to a couple episodes already. It's good stuff. And another thing I want to bring up is your book. You're an author, Surviving Son. I see it behind you.
Yep.
So let our audience know about what made you decide to write a book, and where can they get a copy?
Yeah. So first off, where you can get a copy, you can go to Amazon and you can get a hardcover, paperback, or Kindle format book there. So we have all those options available. I've had several requests for audiobook version as well, which that's in the works. But that is a long process to go through and read through the book and get that out there. So that
You're going to be
coming.
voicing it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm doing that. I toyed around with the idea of hiring someone to read it for me, but I felt like this is my story and it needs to come from me. So I'm doing that, on my own. So, I think it'll come out okay. As long as you can stand the sound of my voice, I think it'll be all right. But if you listen to the podcast, you probably got used to hearing my voice anyway. So,
you got a good voice.
Yeah. So, we'll see how that comes out, but that's in the works. So yeah, anyways, the book started off as really just after I came back from Afghanistan. I just started journaling and writing down things that happened, the way things made me feel, how I reacted to certain things. And it was really because I didn't want my memory to fade over time. I know our memories play tricks on us, and we convince ourselves that one thing has happened or another thing or whatever. And I didn't want that to happen, especially because I knew my son, and now I have 3 children now, but I knew my kids would eventually have questions about what I did in the war and what happened to their uncle and things like that. And I wanted to be able to answer those questions with accurate information, not just what I remembered 10, 15, 20 years later, So I wrote down as much as I could, and I had almost 100 pages of notes just written down, and it was a lot of stuff that I thought had a good lesson to it too. It was kind of like what I was talking about earlier about talking about the sacrifices that the military families make. It talked about that, and the way I wrote the book is in a way that we talk about our our childhood growing up, and you kind of get a feel for who my brother was in those early years, and almost to the point where it hurts you too when you read it, where you feel like, oh my God, I knew this person, and now he's gone, and it um so I've heard from some people that it made them cry. It also has funny stories in there, like one of the ones that I told earlier with the hockey game and everything. I try to keep some of it lighthearted, because I know the type of person that he was. He would never want people crying over him. He wants people to live life and be happy and stuff. So I tried to mix in some humor, some funny stories, and there's some parts where you may be laughing and crying at the same time. So it's got all of that baked into there. But really, I think not only just telling the story, it's my story, which is true, but it's also my brother's story, and I think it's especially important to tell his story because he's no longer here to be able to tell his own story. And as soon as we stop talking about him or any of the other people who have gone before us, I feel like their stories are over, and that's when they truly do die. And so I wanted to tell his story in a way that will outlive even me, in the form of a printed book where that will sit on a shelf and someone will pick it up 50, 60 years from now or whatever, and beyond the amount of time that I might have left on this earth, they'll be able to read that story and find out more about that, about what had taken place. So that's one of it, but also, I talk a lot about the things that I was telling you before with my struggles with PTSD, and the drinking and the insomnia and everything else that I was dealing with, and I try to help other people who might be going through something similar to learn how to cope with these things in a much healthier way than I did. And so, really, it's a historical kind of story, talking about our time over there in Afghanistan, but it also is a way to help other people and continue to serve the veterans who are in our community who might be having a hard time.
I think it's awesome that you did that. I cannot wait to check it out. You read it. I think the cover is awesome. How you did that. I think that's like super cool. But yeah, what good way to keep his legacy alive by doing that. And I like what you did too, with, you said, jump on those memories while they're fresh.
For sure.
And start jotting them down. So kudos to you for doing it, folks. Go grab a copy of his book. We'll also have the link. We'll actually have the book on our book recommendations as well on our Shadows Podcast website, but grab a copy. Well, sir, what final comments do you have for our listeners out there?
I think this is something that I try to get across through my podcast, but I want to make sure that the people who are out there, whether they're veterans or connected to the military in any way, whether they're a spouse or a family member of some sort, or even just anybody else who might be listening, you've survived 100% of your hardest days.
Mm-hmm.
Keep fighting, keep pushing forward, keep driving on, and getting through the next day. You can do it. You've already done the hard work. You've gotten through all these hard days. You can keep doing it. It might seem like it's hard and it's tiring and everything, but the end result is worth it. Life is worth living. It's a gift to be here. It's something that good people have given up their opportunities to be here for us to continue, and don't throw that away. Don't, not just we've talked a little bit about mental health and depression and kind of like suicide and things like that, but not even just that. But don't throw your life away in terms of your actions either. Like don't just have this bad attitude that carries around with you forever because something bad happened to you years ago. Don't throw away all those years of your life that you could be spent living. Live it. It's yours to live, and if you choose to throw it away, that's just to me, I think that's a shame.
Yeah. Well, once again, I thank you for taking time to do this. I applaud what you're doing with the podcast and with your book, getting your story out there, getting your brother's story out there as well. And I think that's the interesting thing about what you're doing here is you're sharing your inner demons that you've battled, and then you're also sharing what your brother went through. So kudos to you for everything. I appreciate you for taking time to be a guest on here on The Shadows.
I appreciate the opportunity to be a guest and share my story with you and your audience. Really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah. And folks, if, like I said, if you like The Shadows, you're definitely going to like what he's doing over with Drive On. So go check it out. Drive On Podcast. We'll have everything in the episode description. But folks, this will conclude this episode of The Shadows Podcast.